Thank you, Den. It's good to be together this morning. I just rushed in here because I suddenly realised that what you're seeing on Facebook, I was worshipping in the garden with everyone else on Facebook, is behind the lives what we're doing here. So it runs to a delay. So I'm a little bit breathless. I've only ran about 10 meters, but still, so good to be together this morning. And I'm so excited to be spending 8 weeks. We're going to spend 8 weeks looking at the book of Daniel. And I really believe this is right for us in this season, that opening up the book of Daniel and reading it and learning from the life of Daniel, from the times of the empires, the Babylonian Empire and the people of God and Daniel's friends, is really important for us at this time. So I want to encourage you, open up the book, read it. Read the commentaries, go deep into this book, because we're only going to be able to give you the headlines during these 8 weeks. We're only going to be able to glean a few points. So if you want to go deeper, I encourage you, go for it. I believe God wants to speak to you through it. You know, this is a book for all seasons. It's fresh for today. I don't know when the first time you heard it was. Maybe like me, it was probably in Sunday school, or, you know, you heard the stories of Daniel and the lion's den. But it's just as fresh and just as important for us today as it was then. It's just as fresh and as important today as it was when it was written 2,500 years ago, or hundreds of years later when the apostles or Jesus spoke from this book. This is a book for this season. So we're going to open it up and we're going to read Daniel chapter 1 together today. And I'm excited and I expect God to speak to you through it. So let's go. Let's read Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to read the whole thing for us, as I think it's important to set the scene. This is titled in the NIV, Daniel's Training in Babylon. And it goes, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Verse 4 starts, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over him, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance to that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this, and he tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters in his whole kingdom. And there Daniel remained until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Wow, what a start. Okay, I want you to say this with me, okay? Say it back to me. I can't hear you, but I'm going to trust you're going to do it. Context is always vital. Thank you. Context is always vital. The background of the story is always so important. It's always key. And the context here is Babylon. Babylon throughout the story. The Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar over, or victory over Judah's king, Jehoiakim. You know, if we read that, the Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar victory. It's one of those things that if we don't know the context, if we don't know the story, we can almost become offended at God. What do you mean God gave over his people to Nebuchadnezzar? But this was an epic story. This was actually a bit of a tragic moment, and it was coming. Trust me, it was coming. We can trace it right back to the start. In fact, I believe we can trace it right back to the Garden of Eden. And God eventually, what's happening here is God is eventually saying, okay, my people, I'll give you over to what you want. I'll give you over to your heart's desires. Okay, have it your way. I'm letting go. And I believe because we've seen God revealed through Jesus, because we know God in his full glory, who God really is, I believe this was heartbreaking for God. I believe this moment broke God's heart. God is the God who weeps when his people do not remain faithful to him, when they choose another lover. And so we haven't got time this morning to read all of the passages. And this is why I said, please go deeper. Please read this book. But if you have a pen or a pen and paper or a device, you know, where you take notes on, or you've got margins in your Bible, just get ready throughout this series to take some notes, to just take little cross references, because I'm going to give you some passages to start off with, and we might not be able to read them, but you could take note and you could go back and read them and check up on what I'm saying and delve deeper. Okay, so be ready just to take some points when they jump out to you. I would love you to look into this for yourself. You see, God's people have been handed over, as the Bible says, but I believe God's people had been allowed to return to Babylon, to return to the place that once held them captive. The triumph of leaving Egypt, long gone. The triumph of Joshua leading them into the promised land, to Jericho, long gone. And during these times and many more times to come, again and again, God's people built altars to other gods. God's people trusted in materialistic gods, or the gods of the cultures of other people, the gods of selfish ambition, social injustice, unethical living. And eventually God hands them over to the culture of Babylon. God had set out to bless Israel. I'm sure we all know this, but we must remind ourselves, God had set out to bless Israel in order for them to be a blessing to the nations. I want to go back a bit here. These are people to be set apart. And like I said, time and time again, they returned back to the gods of the culture that they desired. And despite this, the prophets would be sent from God and repeatedly say, return back to God, please. Stop living these in social justices out upon God's people and the other people around. Come back to God, be faithful. God is faithful to you. Be faithful in return. Jeremiah, he specifically speaks into this context. Take note of this. Jeremiah specifically speaks. Read chapters 27 and chapters 29 into this context that we find here with Daniel. His letter to the Hebrew people is heavily influenced by Hosea, that picture of a God who is faithful, even though his partner is constantly prostituting herself. This is the picture that we're given of a faithful God who is remaining faithful to us, to his people, despite their unfaithfulness. Return to God is what Jeremiah said, and it was great cost to himself, because, you know, the people of God put him in prison for saying that. The people of God put him in prison for pointing out their unethical living, the social injustice that was going on. Babylon, you see, it represents so much more than just a conquering kingdom in this moment. It represents where they had come from, what they were called out of. It also represents the culture of our day. I think we will see that Babylon is very similar to our culture here in the West. It's to have it your own way, whatever way you want. You're the most important. It's very materialistic. And at the heart of all of that is rebellion. Rebellion is at the heart. And you know that's where that starts from. In Genesis chapter 3, we see the question that turns into rebellion. Surely God is keeping something from me. Surely I'm more important. Surely I can be like God. Surely I want to do things my way. Surely it's me that what really matters. And I'm going to fast forward here. So that was Genesis chapter 3, Genesis chapter 11 and 12. If we go to Genesis chapter 11, we see the Tower of Babel. Do you know that story? At this point, humanity is still united, very close to the garden, still living long lives. There's one humanity and one people, and they decide to build this huge, what is a huge altar, a huge sort of tower to get up to heaven, to say, look at us. We are strong and mighty and important. Worship us. This was Noah's grandson, Noah's great grandson, I think. And Babel and those people were called Shinar, which is Hebrew for Babylon or Babylonia. Interesting, hey? I mean, Babel sounds a little bit like Babylon anyway, doesn't it? But all united and actually living in a comfortable place, a beautiful plain, and they build this massive shrine to themselves. But God had said to them, no, we are to go out, you are to go out, fill the earth and bless it. Bless the earth. But no, they decide to come into themselves, to make themselves like God, to puff themselves up. And it was a violent time because, we read that God scattered them. And this is where many languages and many tribes and many people groups spring up from, and the division that is now existing amongst humanity happened at this point. And when we read God scattered them, what I believe is there was massive fighting for status. We want to be the most important. We want to take control. And this is where the Chaldeans is the language that, or Chaldeans is the language that was given. This is where it comes out of this place where Abraham was called, or Abram at the time. So God looks into this kind of mess and he pinpoints the Chaldeans, which is, again, another word for Babylon. So he pinpoints the Babylon culture and he says, you know what? I'm going to call you, Abraham, to start a new bloodline, to start a new people that will be mine and that will be faithful to me and that will bless all the nations, that will live for other people, live as my reflection on the earth. Despite all of this chaos and division and murder, you will be different. What a calling they had. So they left Babylon and all it represents behind. And we can check out that story, Genesis 11 and 12. Look for the words Shinar and Chaldeans because they are the same words as Babylon. They're the Hebrew words for it. And listen to what Isaiah says to God's people at a later date here. He's speaking about Babylon culture again. He says, you defy the I am by saying I am. Who God says I am, but you say, no, I am. Listen to this, he says. This is Isaiah 47, verse 8 to 10. Listen to this, you pleasure-loving kingdom, living at ease and feeling secure. You say, I am the only one, and there is no other. I will never be a widow or lose my children. You felt secure in your wickedness. No one sees me, you said, but your wisdom and knowledge have led you astray. And you said, I am the only one, and there is no other. So at the very start of this book, I want to make this really clear. At the very start of this book, God had allowed them to return from where they came. Their hearts had already returned. This is where they wanted to be. And they were warned over and over about this is not going to work out well for you. It's a tragedy. And we need to know this from the start. And we need to know that we still live in Babylon, particularly our culture. I think we will see this as we work through this book and some of the things I'll say today, but I'm convinced that we do not live in a godly or a Christian nation. I'm referring to the whole of the Western civilization here, because I'm convinced, my friends, that we still live in Babylon. Our culture reflects that way of Babylon. Welcome today to the book of Daniel and welcome to Babylon. And we are going to look at how do we have faith and hope and faith under pressure, because this culture will put us under pressure if we don't assimilate to it. If we don't just become it, it will put us under pressure, and we're called to live with faith and with hope despite being captive. So we're given this great account of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And what I love about this is we're told from the start, they are royals. They are picked out of the royal bloodline. That, yes, they're captive, but they are noble and they have royal blood in them. And that despite the indoctrination of the culture, despite the brainwashing that goes on, and despite the fact that they will put, if they are faithful to God's culture and the way of God wanted them to live, it will put them into danger. They live a faithful way. A great example for us. And so Israel is captive. The royals, they're captives. And we need to know that we too are royals. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, you are a royal priesthood. Thanks to Jesus, we have a royal bloodline. But we are also captives, just like Daniel and his friends. We live in another kingdom, in another world. Look around us, look at the culture. It's self-absorbed, self-obsessed, self-indulgent. I'm pretty sure I don't need to prove that to you, but just think about it. We are told that we are the center, that our comfort is what's important, that what we earn and what we do should lead us to live a more comfortable life. And you deserve whatever you want to eat today, you can eat it. And so as much as this culture has been given to us and has the potential to indoctrinate us into it and to live that way, it's very easy and very tempting. We must also know, like Daniel and his friends, we have been given to the culture. We are called to bless it and to seek its welfare, to seek its prosperity. We're going to read that actually, or you can read it in Jeremiah 29, verse 7, and we're going to see it over the coming weeks. We are told to be a blessing, to seek the prosperity and the welfare of Babylon or the Western culture that's around us. But we must be careful that we do not allow it to overcome us and to fill us in a way that we just assimilate, we just become the same. And so they were handpicked from this royal bloodline, a strategic move on the part of the Babylonians. They want to win the hearts and the minds of these people, and they want to wipe them out. Start top down. They want everyone to be assimilated into their culture. And you know what's sad here? We see that Daniel and his friends, they are among others. We don't know what happened to the rest. We can assume that they were just become part of the culture. That, you know, we don't know what happened to them. That they assimilate to it to such an extent that they no longer stood out. They did not live out their call to bless the nations, to be God's people on earth. They just became Babylon. Now, I don't know. I don't think it cuts off their bloodline as royals. Nothing can separate you from the love of God through Jesus. You are a royal. That's Romans chapter 8, verse 31. But how devastating that they couldn't maintain their faithfulness and live out God's call on their life. You know, indoctrination, the culture around us is so tempting. It's so tempting. And so the first thing I want to say about this culture is, one, you can see it, and you can see it because it's self-obsessed. It's obsessed with the self. Captivity can be really appealing because it can look like you're looking after yourself. Faithfulness can be really hard going because it calls you to care about others. And so being self-obsessed, the culture, the Babylon culture, it goes after the young, the beautiful, the intelligent, the witty. That's what scripture says there. You know, Babylon culture is obsessed with youth and good looks and intelligence. It draws it out and holds it up high and looks much like our Western culture, doesn't it? You know, I'm turning 40 next year, and some people are embarrassed to say that because no longer am I youthful. No longer am I one of the youth. No longer can I say I'm a young person. Actually, I'm middle-aged now. And we learn from early years to cover up our blemishes, to cover up our age. Now, sometimes we blame the people that are doing that, but it's not. It's our problem because we express shock when someone doesn't look, you know, well made up, or we have expectations that people should look a certain way or sound a certain way. And in fact, we're called to come in the opposite spirit and to bless people no matter what they look like. That's living as as people of God. But living as Babylon or Western culture would be that we expect these standards. We expect gym bodies. You know, the way we educate in tiers that accelerates those that have intelligence, and we often neglect those that don't. You know, Babylon is self-obsessed. That's number one. And number two, Babylon is self-indulgent. They were given the food from the king's table and the wine. We are totally indulgent as a culture, just like Babylon was. Verse 16 says, choice food, have it your way. You know, coffee, I've got my coffee cup here. I'll be careful not to show which company it's from, but I've got my coffee cup and I can have it any way I want. Self-indulgent culture tells us we can have food, whatever food we want, in whatever way we want it. You know, the thing with this self-obsession and this self-indulgence, it doesn't make us happy. And I think you know that in your heart. But there was a temptation during the first lockdown, almost a year ago, to almost celebrate this chance to focus on ourselves and offer self-care. You know, we're going to have walks, we're going to watch box sets, we're going to be baking. People invest the money that they saved in fuel and not going on holiday in a hot tub in their garden. But people are more depressed 1 year on than they have ever been. That's what the statistics show in the UK. And research, it shows us that wanting something else makes you unhappy. Now, I have had my eye, I doubt I'll ever be able to afford it, but on a Tesla car. There used to be a showroom near where I lived, and I used to sit in the car and think, wow, what a wonderful car. These are top of the range electric cars. And research shows that made me unhappy because I wanted it. But research also shows that if I got the Tesla, I wouldn't be any happier. Getting what you don't have but you want, it doesn't make you happy. Babylon will not make you happy. Malawi went through a really difficult transition when I lived there because Facebook got into the rural community. We're using Facebook now, but people got these cheap mobile phones, solar ways of getting power to them, and they were able to suddenly see, you know, rural Malawi is 86% of that population who slept on bamboo mats, who had the same kind of food day in, day out, who danced and told stories for entertainment. Suddenly they were giving a window into the lives of those living down the road in the cities, and the comfy beds and the big screen tellies and the variety of food. And it made an expression of sadness come upon a lot of people because they suddenly wanted something that they didn't have. But yet we know, having got that stuff, it doesn't make us happy. You know why? Because it's captivity, and friendly captivity at that. It is friendly captivity. You know, Beth Moore puts it, she's done a wonderful Bible study on Daniel. Beth Moore puts it, there is nothing more dangerous than friendly captivity. And as we'll see, the problem is it doesn't remain friendly unless you allow yourself to assimilate, to become captive to it. Daniel and his friends, they've played ball so far. Babylon is taking them through the indoctrination process. And they've not kicked up a fuss. I think this is fascinating. They were actually renamed. Their Hebrew names, Daniel, God is my judge. Hananiah, Yahweh has been gracious. Mishael, who is what God is. Azariah, Yahweh has helped. Those names were stripped from them, and they were given the names Belteshazzar. Baal will protect, a materialistic God. Shadrach, inspired of Aku, another god of the Babylon culture. Meshach, belonging to Aku. Abednego, servant of Nego. They were stripped of the true God's names, their identity, and given these names of other gods of the culture. But it seems they were willing to just go with this, take it on, despite the attack on identity, despite the 3 years of education they were going to go through. They went for it. But then comes this moment of choice food. And Daniel, it says he determined not to defile himself, he determined not to corrupt himself in this way. For him, this was the line. He had got to the line and he said, you know what, I can't really cross this. People talk about why this was, and there's probably an element of all of it. Some say it's because it was sacrificed to Baal. Yes, but at the same time he was named after Baal. Some say it was forbidden because probably included pork-like foods, pork. So Daniel, you know, he had the law of Moses, and this was a great benchmark for him. But he knew for some reason this would corrupt him, defile him. So maybe it was about the indulgence as well, or the temptation of such choice food, or what he knew this would do to how he saw life and how this would drag him into the culture. I don't know. But what I do know is when the word we read as vegetables is used, actually this was included pulses and grains, and it was actually a very healthy diet. It's very wise what Daniel's done here. And it's interesting because he could have said, you know, oh, wow, God, hey friends, God's providing us with this lovely choice food. God's done this for us. But for Daniel, he just rose above it and he wanted God, not comfort. He wanted God, not status. He wanted God, not safety. And he said, you know what? This is going to defile. This is going to corrupt me. I'm going to do my best not to eat it. So what did he do? Did he rebuke? Did he stand on his soapbox and preach? No, he showed wisdom. And you know, when we want God above all else, it's important that when we're faced with those tempting, juicy benefits of Babylon, we're able to maintain our faithfulness, and we're able to still bless and love the culture, and we're able to be wise. And what wisdom he showed and what faithfulness he showed. He could have pretended to eat the food, couldn't he? He could have lied about it. He could have tried to do a deal with the chef. I don't know, but he made the call with integrity and favor. He faced up to the officials. He stepped down a level of officials, if you read through it, because maybe just that little bit of distance between the official and the king would give the official a bit more leeway to be brave. I don't know. But we'll see Daniel's attitude was, even if this had cost me, even if the official had said off with his head, I think Daniel would have done it anyway. He was determined not to corrupt himself. What challenges with integrity do we face today? Is there someone that is encouraging us to lie and to cheat? Or is there something that we just are ignoring, hoping it goes away? Is there some fiddling of the books going on? You know, and despite this kind of stuff going on, we must remember Daniel wanted to bless that official. He is wise and he is loving towards that official. He seeks the blessing and prosperity and welfare of that culture. He just doesn't allow it to become him. And of course, you know, they look great after this. Of course, they did eat in that health food diet. Instead of wine and pork scratchings, he was eating healthy food. And because they're so skilled and so wise and so intelligent, eventually they find themselves in front of the king himself. And he finds them to be 10 times better than all the wisdom of the world, the magicians. You know, how many of us get to the top, to that point where we can speak to the king, but we are so defiled and so corrupted by the time we get there, we can no longer speak the truth. You know, who are our governments listening to? Who are the leaders in our local communities listening to? What are the offers of fulfillment that we just know if we accepted that, it would corrupt us? Are we buying into Babylon or Western ideals to such an extent that we lose our faithfulness to God and his way? And then we can no longer be a blessing and we can no longer speak truth into these situations. Are we seeking to be blessed instead of to bless? I believe Daniel would have clinged on to something like Psalm 27 verse 4. This was the core of him. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire of his temple. One thing, that's what I live for. Daniel was living this temple dream despite the captivity, and we can do that too. And don't hear what I'm not saying here. Please be careful. I don't think Daniel had it easier than us, but he had less layers to work through because he did have a very clear law of Moses: do not eat the pork. And so he knew that would cross the line. But for us, as we think about our coffee, there's nothing wrong with having coffee our way. And God, please let this be true. There's nothing wrong with eating a pack of pork scratchings and having a beer. For us, actually, we've got to determine what that line is. What is it that would defile and corrupt me, us? How do I need to stand up and speak with wisdom and love and blessing when I know this thing would cross the line for me if I went over it? And Daniel did it, remember, in a way that loved his boss. He actually ended up getting his boss credit, I reckon. I reckon his boss got credit for training these guys through because they were, you know, the best, 10 times better. If I live in a way that I'm no longer set apart, no longer being a blessing to the culture with love and truth, instead I'm assimilated to it, then I'm bowing the knee to Babylon and I'm not bowing the knee to Jesus. I want to dwell in the house of the Lord. Jesus said, lose your life for me, and that's where you'll find it. We have to live in a way that we're prepared to lose our life. And as we draw this to a close then, so as we draw this introduction to Daniel to a close, I want to ask 2 things as a response. 2 things. 1, I want us to consider the question, am I a Babylonian or a royal priesthood and a citizen of heaven? Am I a Babylonian or a royal priesthood and a citizen of heaven? Listen, Babylon is tempting, so tempting, and it will constantly call us back. The way of the cross is daunting, so daunting, and it will constantly challenge us. But we need to ask ourselves, where does our heart belong? We've been brought up with Western indoctrination. The way we think often brings us back into the culture. As I'm saying that, it might even trigger you. It might trigger you a little. Remember, we love our culture and we want to call out the good in it and the good values, but sometimes there will be a line and we must not cross it. We have to be aware that we're royals living in another kingdom as captives. We've been given over to this culture for a time. What is it that tempts you to cross the line? Is it a food and indulgence? It's a problem for me many times. Is it sex that allures you? Is it the ideals of a family life, the beautiful family living, that perfect picture that we're painted? I say that as someone who's married with 2 kids, so I'm probably not the right person to talk about that. How about entertainment, alcohol, education, status, wealth? There's so many things that can allure us and just drag us over the line. People pleasing, what people would think of us. These are the allures of Babylon, and they will rename you. They will pull away your identity, and they will attack the truth that you are a royal priesthood and a citizen of heaven, here for a purpose, and they will try to assimilate you. So are you a Babylonian, or are you a royal priesthood of heaven? It's a question to ask yourself today. And number 2, either way, whether you're a Babylonian or a royal priesthood, do something about it. If you are a Babylonian, let me tell you this, you do not have to be. The kings of this world, once they see that you no longer can be won over with those allures, with the sex, the money, the food, the fame, the wealth. Once you realize, just as the statistics show you, that this is not going to make you happy. In fact, it's going to make you sad. You are just going to become more and more captive. Once they figure out that you know the truth, this is not good. The culture is going to make you unhappy. They will tell you, you are not a royal. You are not God. You cannot be a priesthood who speaks with God, who is going to inherit God's kingdom. You just cannot. Just look at what you've done. You've crossed the line one too many times and you deserve punishment. That's what they will tell you. You deserve to be imprisoned. And you know what? There's a chance that they are actually right. We've been unfaithful to God and we could actually deserve him to turn his back to us. God has made you and he's remained faithful to you, even though none of us have remained faithful to him throughout our lives. All of us have burnt up our birth certificate at some point. Well, do you know what? God made you a new one. God said at great cost to himself, I do not care. I am going to come and win you back. Through Jesus, he has won you back. And they do not have a claim on your life. No matter what you've done, Jesus has the ultimate claim and he's won the victory. Run to him. He's won the battle. Run from Babylon. Run to Jesus. He's freely given you this gift and you can receive it today. It's a free gift. And you know what? If you're a citizen of heaven, if you're a royal priesthood, you run to Jesus. He's claimed your life. He's freed you from the captivity of Babylon. Then I want to say, run from that which will corrupt you. There's a line, and I know all of us have it, and we look at it and we think, oh, I want to pick that choice food up today. Oh, if only I could have that comfort. This is hard. I'm living in captivity. Well, how can you be a blessing if you've had your head turned? So confess our sins to one another and to God. I encourage you to find someone to be accountable with. And I encourage you again, just like I encourage someone who is a Babylon citizen to run to Jesus. Run to Jesus. It's by his blood that we're forgiven and set free. So consider, are you a Babylonian or are you a royal priesthood, a citizen of heaven this morning? And 2, do something about it. And that thing is always run to Jesus. Run to Jesus. Pray to God for his help and his strength. This is the starting point in how we can have faith in Jesus and hope under pressure. This culture will put us under pressure more than it ever has done before. And it will eventually expose itself as fraudulent. It won't make you happy. But we've been given a great king in Jesus. And I, for one, want to say Jesus is my king this morning. And he can be your king too, even if you live in Babylon. Welcome to the book of Daniel. Welcome to Babylon. Welcome to living with hope and faith under pressure. It's been a good morning. Thank you for being with me. Back over to you, Den.
Well,